Welcome to Thursday. It's the 11th of March, 2021. Well, a lot of folks wondering, what is the latest on this upcoming spring storm? Well, first of all, the storm's going to happen. We're kind of past that point of no return. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of details now. It's all down to details. The storm is tracking a little more north on some of the modeling, and this could make a really big difference for some of you in terms of the snow, either getting little or none or getting a lot. Now, there continue to be big differences on snowfall amounts. This is always the case. This happens with every big spring storm. But the differences are as much of a factor of two, and we'll show you that. We always like to talk about analogs. We always like to talk about, well, have we seen this before? We're going to examine the 2003 storm, which some of you may remember. That 2003 storm was epic in terms of the snow that it brought to some parts of Colorado. Got 80 inches or more of snow out of that storm in the foothills west of Denver. That 2003 storm is interesting to look at because there's some similarities and there's some other things that are different about it. But that's one storm we're going to take a look at and compare it to this one. High impacts are coming for travel and livestock. As we mentioned in yesterday's podcast, stock growers, you got to plan for this one. It's, again, not a matter of if, it's just a matter of how much. There's going to be wind and heavy snow, and this will be very impactful. Travel is going to be difficult, probably not even an option once we get into Saturday midday, into Sunday, and maybe even into early Monday. These are the current advisories for winter weather and stormy weather across the United States. And the blue area here I want to show you are all winter storm watches in anticipation of this storm. So geographically, it kind of shows you where the biggest concern is right now. I will tell you that as we go through today and tomorrow, you're likely going to see the areas of watches and advisories expand a little bit more as we get more confident on the track of the storm. Now, here it is right now. I wanted to show you the satellite photo just to show you that, it doesn't look like much. You see all these little clouds, these little puffy clouds a little bit right here? This is actually the upper level low. Yesterday, we talked about how these storms come off the Pacific. A lot of times they don't have a lot of moisture and you got to get moisture into them. This is a really good example. We've got moisture coming up here out ahead of the storm, and that's going to produce a little bit of weather today and tomorrow. But the main event, the main low is back here, and it needs to get supercharged with moisture before it really blows up. Now, this is where it is on the weather charts as of today. The upper level low is into the Central California coast area. Here's yesterday's system already moving on out. Going forward, by Saturday morning, here is also going to be at the surface, bringing east to southeast winds, transporting that higher humidity air from the Gulf of Mexico into the high plains region. So by Saturday morning, we're going to see snow breaking out in the mountains and along the Front Range. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer to show you geographically a little bit of a better perspective on what this storm is doing. So this is 24 hours later. This is Saturday morning at sunrise. This is Sunday morning at sunrise. So it goes from west of the Four Corners, about Page, Arizona, to the center of the low, just about, maybe Lyman, Colorado. What is going to be critical in terms of the placement of the heaviest snow with this storm is going to be where this upper level low decides to set up. Notice, if you look at the wind barbs, that counterclockwise flow is bringing a due east wind into the Front Range of northern Colorado and southern Wyoming, which is really the bullseye of the storm right now. This area of high pressure right here in the Gulf of Mexico, the clockwise flow around here, that's why all that moisture is going to be available to be brought into that storm. At the same time, though, those thunderstorms we talked about yesterday will be blowing up here, taking a little bit of that moisture. But what I want to show you is the difference that we're looking at in terms of the modeling. What I'm showing you here is the European model. Here's the U.S. model for the same time. So we have the low just about over Lyman on the European model. On the USA model, we're more down towards Colorado Springs. Now, you might say, what's the difference between Lyman and Pueblo or Colorado Springs? Well, not a lot, but it makes a big difference. And I'll show you where it'll make a big difference. If it takes this northerly track, then we've got to watch the Black Hills of South Dakota and Rapid City for the possibility of this storm getting into there. If it tracks further south, the Black Hills may just get clipped by it. If it's further south, watch out Denver, Boulder. They'll just get walloped. If it goes north on the European model, well, Denver's still going to have a significant snow event, but it's going to be more like Boulder, Estes Park up to west of Fort Collins, Cheyenne. They get the big snow. So if you're a Denver watcher or if you're in central Colorado, the track of the storm is critical. Same for you folks up along the I-90 corridor, because if it goes more north, that I-90 corridor is now under the gun. If it stays south, Denver's more under the gun, I-90 is not. So just the subtle differences of 50 miles or so can make a huge difference. Now, there's a huge difference in how much water is getting put out by the storm. This is the European model. These are the values for the whole storm, and they're in inches. So 2 inches, a little more than 2 inches in Cheyenne, Wheatland, Wyoming, almost 3 inches. You can see all the orange. Where you see orange, it's 2 inches or more. Notice the front range of Colorado, Denver to Fort Collins, still some very impressive amounts of moisture, but just a few days ago, these areas were under 3 to 4 inches of water. Now, this is the European model. This is the northerly track. See the northerly track getting into Rapid City now, getting up to Gillette, up to Sheridan, up into the Bighorns, and into this area here. But if you were to look at the USA model, look at the difference. First of all, it's more south. The Black Hills are almost out of it. Look at this, 7 inches of water. Basically that's basically near Boulder there. So you're talking about an epic amount of snow if that happens. But it's a factor of 2 when you look at the differences between the model solutions. This is something we face every day with computer models. It's a computer model. It's make-believe. It's only a guide. It's only a tool. You have to use these tools, and you have to be skeptical with them, and you have to take them, and you have to really interrogate the data to make sure you make the right call. And so what we're faced with is what is going to be a significant storm for northern Colorado, southern Wyoming, the strongest storm we've had in a couple of years for sure. But this would be, I would call your average front range storm for March in Colorado. A foot and a half, wind, all the things you get with a March storm in Denver. Or this, which is basically a repeat of the 2003 storm. So there's some big difference. Tells us that the European model is a little more realistic in terms of what happens with reality. The American model tends to go off the rails and goes a little bit crazy. This is the difference in snowfall. Those numbers you see there in inches. Now, I think what you're seeing now is reasonable. If the European model ends up being more correct, these amounts are going to be closer to reality. If the GFS or the American model is going to be more correct, these are the amounts that you're looking at. See that 70 inches of snow there near Boulder? Wow. However, there's a real big difference between 14 inches in Boulder or 70. One thing I want to point out, though, is the one area where the storm is going to get very impactful, it's going to be in that area. Regardless of which way it tracks, that area is going to be impacted. Wind. We're likely going to see blizzard situations developing late Saturday afternoon and Saturday night right here, as well as up here and right here across western areas of Nebraska. Now, this area right here is going to be likely in a bad blowing snow situation where blizzard conditions are likely going to be hitting Saturday evening and Saturday night into Sunday. And look at the wind in New Mexico. High winds down there happen on the bottom of these lows as it goes on through. I wanted to briefly talk about 2003. 2003 brought 5, 6, 7 feet of snow to the foothills of central and northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. It's a storm a lot of folks remember. We had roofs collapsing. It was just a huge storm. This is what the upper level low was like when that storm came into Colorado. Notice that it is in northern New Mexico. It's more centered towards that Colorado-New Mexico border area. It was placed further south. This storm is going to be placed further north. So it's not exactly the same as 2003. And there's also another big difference. And I think this is something that is going to play out. This storm looks to be about a 2-day storm. That March 2003 storm was a 3-day storm. This is going to be a 2-day storm because this is by Sunday afternoon. The low starts to move into northeast Colorado, headed towards Nebraska because it gets kicked out by this guy right here. The way the weather pattern works, this is just plain physics. is that as this next trough, as this next low comes into the Pacific coast, it's going to make this system move. In 2003, we didn't have that kicker. We didn't have the low coming in across the Pacific Northwest to kick that storm out. So this storm is probably not going to last 3 days. It's going to last 2. So I don't think it's going to rise to the level of the 2003 storm. It may get close in some areas, but I don't think it's going to be an exact repeat. So to summarize, southeast and east central Wyoming, western Nebraska, and the I-25 corridor of Colorado will be impacted the most to about the Palmer Divide. This will be especially true on the foothills west of I-25 from, let's say, Douglas, Casper, Wyoming, along that I-25 corridor to about Denver and south of Denver. West of that area, in those foothills, the upslope will produce a tremendous amount of snow. Estes Park, Conifer, Evergreen, the Interstate 80 summit between Laramie and Cheyenne, Laramie Peak, the mountains west of Wheatland and Douglas, Wyoming. That's where you're going to see the biggest snowfall totals. For you folks in western South Dakota and northeastern Wyoming along I-90, watch this storm. The forecast right now is keeping everything south, but if the European model is right, you could be under the gun. And that northerly track, if it keeps going more north, well, the Denver metro area is not going to get as much as some of the forecasts are stating right now, but that will change if the American model is more correct and tracks further south. We're very confident with this storm, and when we talk to you tomorrow, it's basically sorting out some of these details listed here and trying to figure out those northern parts of the storm and the southern parts of the storm and see where things end up. We'll talk to you tomorrow. In the meantime, get prepared.